Hello, today we're going to be looking at Neo-Marxism. So this again is for AQA Beliefs in Society. In today's video we're going to discuss the views of Engels, Gramsci and Maduro in relation to Marxism, and to understand liberation theology and then eventually lead on to the evaluation of the neo-Marxist viewpoints. Now, as an introduction here, neo-Marxist and ideology. Neo-Marxists tend to believe that the original Marxist view of ideology, that the belief systems of all members of a society are directly determined by the economic system, is too deterministic. Some of the later writings of Marx suggest that the economic base of society influences or limits people's values and beliefs in society, but does not directly determine them. Neo-Marxists have therefore developed this less deterministic views on ideology, and we can start to really see this emerging in terms of their understanding. With the real emphasis here that these are new Marxists, and in particular they do not agree that parts of the superstructure are completely controlled by the ruling class. They argue that actually Marx to an extent got it wrong, and that we should be seeing that individuals and religion can be seen as some form of revolutionary force as a result. Now, just as we're carrying on over a quick introduction here. Now, some neo-Marxists have argued that religion can sometimes be a potentially revolutionary force. So religion is not shaped by the bourgeoisie. Religion can be a liberating force, obviously really allowing that proletariat to create some form of social change in society. And this can be seen with liberation theology, where religious teachings have encouraged the poor to revolt against the bourgeoisie or the individuals that own the mode of production. And then we've got Methodism here, which is set up to cater for the disenchanted poor, to really try to help that poor understand that where they currently are in their lives is not a God-given right, that they can revolt and they can change to obviously create some form of revolution within their society. Now, we've got Frederic Angles here. As we know, he is one of Marx's friends and close collaborators. And Engels recognised religion did not always act as a conservative force, supporting the interests of the ruling class. He believed that religion usually started off amongst oppressed groups in society as a way of coping with their oppression. He also argued that eventually religion could become a force for change by uniting an oppressed group and giving them a common set of beliefs. It provided the basis of future actions. When Engels wrote about early Christian sects who opposed to Roman rule, he compared them to communist and socialist political movements, campaigning for freedom from oppression. In these cases, religion became a source of resistance to oppressors and therefore a force of change. So Engels really was starting to challenge Marx's viewpoints there, that religion is primarily only a force of conservative nature, whilst in fact it can be used for radical change as a result. Now, Antonio Gramsci here in 1971 argued that members of society possesses dual consciousness. They are partially influenced by ruling class ideology because of the media, the education system and religion, which promote it. However, they may also have direct experience of exploitation, for example from poor working conditions and low wages. The working class partly see through the capitalist system while not rejecting it altogether. So Gramsci then argued that at times religion/churches can express the interests of the oppressed groups. He recognised that the role that the hegemony of the Catholic Church playing in serving ruling class interests, but said that religion doesn't inevitably play this role, that it can be used to create some form of change in society. The next person that we've got here is Otto Maduro in 1982. He believes that religion has some independence or relative autonomy from the ruling class control and from the economic system. He denies that religion is always a conservative force and says that it can sometimes become revolutionary. Now, from our two previous writers already, Gramsci and Engels, the real emphasis on religion could be a revolutionary force. So it's all about whether or not it will want to help the oppressed groups. Now, Maduro uses the idea of liberation theology here, which really emphasizes that could part of the world in terms of Neo-Marxism. He used the example of liberation theology to illustrate his point. Until recent decades, the Catholic Church in Latin America sided with the bourgeoisie and the right-wing military dictatorships in Latin America, in such countries as El Salvador and Nicaragua. Now, the Catholic Church gave little support to trade union strikers and oppositional political parties. Increasingly, however, Catholic priests began to speak up for the interests of the poor. Some priests developed a new theology which interpreted Christianity as being on the side of the oppressed groups and as supporting their liberation. Now, liberation theology therefore developed, which argued that power and wealth, especially land, should be redistributed from the rich to the poor. Now, this set of religious beliefs has developed an ideology similar to Marxism, whereby it encourages revolution rather than acts as the opium of the masses. Now, as you can see on this little slide that I've got loaded up, there is a QR code there. If you scan the QR code, it takes you to an extended history of liberation theology from one of the BBC websites. Now we're going to go through some examples here which really illustrate the point of view of the neo-Marxist ideologies. Now, there are other instances where religion has become a radical force. So, for example, cargo cults on islands colonized by Europeans in the Pacific believed that ships bearing a cargo of riches would appear over the horizon to give them much wealth as the European colonizers, and this would result in the Europeans being overthrown off the islands. And when the ships did not appear, the cults became radical political movements seeking the expulsion of the colonial occupiers. So, by giving the belief and the idea that there is going to be some form of change for these individuals, they would then rebel against the ideas of the mainstream bourgeoisie. So, really, the religion acted as a form of social change and movement within the society. Now, as an added extra point here for neo-Marxism, we have got Williams in 1961 to 1978. He argues that class cultures and beliefs are much more varied and creative than crude. Which Marxist views imply. Different classes tend to develop different views of the world. For example, the ruling class tends to have a more individualistic culture. You can succeed by pursuing your own individual careers, whilst working class culture tends to be more collective. You succeed through group action, so for example, going on strike or using the trade union. So obviously our example of the cargo cults there, we can definitively see that actually that is what's happening, is that the working class united then to rebel against the ideologies. So the ruling class ideology may be further challenged by the residual cultures, so the ideology of declining class, for example, the landowners of Britain, or emergent ideology, so the new ideology emerging from the classes which are developing, so for example, rich celebrities. Now, residual and emergent ideologies may be oppositional, so opposed to the dominant culture, or alternative, and they coexist with the dominant culture. Now, what we can really see and use this for is when we look at examples such as the Arab Springs. Now, the Arab Springs, although their foundationally were not religious in the ideas, religion did play a massive role in terms of getting the movement for the protests. Many of the protesters met at religious institutions, and then this gave them the base in which they could talk, have a shared views on how they're going to deal with the protests. So without that unifying place of that religious ideas, they would not have that huge collective movement which has then created the changes within those countries. Now, it is important that the Arab Springs is identified within your essays because it is showing actually, hang on here, religion can still have some massive impact on the way in which the working class unite together and create that collective change. Now, the evaluation of neo-Marxism here. There is plenty of evidence to support Neo-Marx's view that religion is not always a conservative force supporting the interests of the ruling class. Religion has quite often acted as a radical force resulting in social change. Ironically, religion has also acted as a radical force for the overthrow of communism, which we will see in the example on the next slide. So, for example, in Poland in the 1990s, the ruling Communist Party was opposed by free trade unions and by the Roman Catholic Church, which eventually this led to the overthrowing of the communist system and its replacement by Western democratic regimes. So, therefore, arguably William's point of view there, where we are more collective as the working class, this therefore banded them all together and created that change. Further criticisms on neo-Marxism come from postmodernist camps here, so such as Pekruski and Walters in 1996, who argue that neo-Marxists exaggerate the influence of class on culture and ideology. They deny there is ruling class and argue that the classes are no longer significant. Society is too fragmented and based on lifestyle choices to have ideologies, widespread beliefs that support the interests of particular groups. Now, for this, because we are more of those consumeristic cultures, Pekruski and Walters really is hitting on the nail on the head, that society is too fragmented for us to really create any form of change. It is instead the individuals who are becoming more aware that is then leading to the change. Other sociologists include feminists and anti-racists, argue that the ideology can reflect other social divisions apart from class. So obviously the idea of division based on gender, race and ethnicity really can have a massive role to play as well. So as a form of conclusion here, Marxist and neo-Marxist theories successfully explain the role of religion in some societies at some times, but they do not explain how religion works in all societies at all times. Religion is not necessarily an expression of ruling class ideology or revolutionary political force, although it does sometimes act in this way, as examples that we've looked at have illustrated. So, if you have got any questions based on neo-Marxism, please come and see me.